All right, welcome back to segment 2 of our panel. Everybody tuning in, we're going to be continuing the conversation that we had on the previous episode. Let's jump right into it. Bridget, could you just say something so everybody hears your voice and knows it's yours?
Hey, everybody, welcome back.
All right, Julia.
Hi, team. Good to talk to you again.
And Andrea.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, cool. And I'm your host, James. All right, so let's get back into it. So strikes. Who would like to start with the writer's strike? Let's kind of do, if we could do like a high level overview of what's going on. Who feels like they have the best pulse on kicking that off?
I nominate Andrea.
Yeah, me too.
I accept the nomination. Cool. So last week, writers have gone on strike, particularly from Writers Guild. One of their main concerns and the reasons for which they're doing this is the fact that, of course, inflation is a huge aspect of it. Actually, it's a lot of things, but a couple of important things. Inflation is a big part of it, and we're going to talk about this more in depth as well. Their buying power has gone down, as for everyone. It's related to the fact that residuals that they get from streaming, from writing for a show that's going on a streaming platform, they are much lower than they used to be in broadcast television. So that is one of the main things that is happening for writers right now. And that is, of course, limiting their ability to actually have a career and pursue a career in writing. And it's basically transforming them a bit into somewhat of a gig economy. The seasons on streaming platforms are much shorter than they were in broadcast television. We used to see shows of, 20, 25 episodes a season. Right now, we can even see 5 to 10. So there's a couple of factors that really go into the compensation of writers and why it's much lower now than what it used to be. That's caused them to go on a strike. From what you were mentioning earlier as well, I think American Airlines has gone on a strike too.
Oh, they've approved a strike. They've approved it. So yeah, right.
Cool. So yeah, we're going to talk about that more, but on the topic of the writer's strike, that was basically the overview of their demands and what they need and why they're doing this, which in my opinion is highly understandable. I support them. And I think it's really good that they're making their voices heard. Because it is a tough economy for everyone. Streaming sites and platforms are making a lot of money. We do see their revenue and profitability. So it's only normal, I think, for writers to really ask for this. But I'm curious to your thoughts as well. Bridget, do you want to chime in?
I think this is a much bigger thing than just the writer's strike and how this is going to impact the economy. There are so many states that have high production teams that are involved there. There's catering, there's the production crew, there's the actors and actresses. So there's a lot of people that we're literally talking billions of dollars going out of the economy because production is halted. And while I think that the writers are fully entitled to be well compensated for their work product, I think that this has much larger ramifications. The last writer's strike was back in 2007. They were out for 100 days. And from what I've read, that there is possibility that this could go on longer than that 100 days that was previously done in 2007. Some of the streaming services said they've been stockpiling scripts. So you've been stockpiling scripts. Are you going to be able to provide production and actors and actresses that are going to work? Because they're going to stand in unity with the writers. So this is just a really big and complex issue right now.
Yeah, it really is. And during the last strike, that's when they actually received some of the benefits that they had during these last 10 years, right? So they did get something out of it then. They'll probably get something out of it now. And how long it takes, I think it also depends on the streaming platforms and on these companies as well. And I know, yes, it does have the potential for a lot of disruption, but from what I've seen in interviews, they really feel like it's the only way for their voices to be heard, unless they do something that's more dramatic, that actually impacts these companies.
Yeah, I'm definitely pro-employee, so which I know we all here are, of course. So I'm definitely yeah, I hear you, Bridget. Like, obviously, it will be economically impactful, but I think the net gain could be they are better compensated, and then there is actually more money being circulated in this industry, and they're getting paid fairly, and they're getting the benefits that they really need. I mean, obviously, I didn't choose like a gig economy job, but I cannot even imagine how stressful that would be. And the fact that writing has always been gig-ish, but to your point, Andrea, it went from a 25 episode season to a 5 episode season. So like the hustle and the grind and the having to sell yourself has exponentially increased. So any benefits that they can get to offset that, I'm all for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, I think Julia, that what you just said, right? Like writing has always been, from what I've heard, a very difficult career.
Mhm.
Like I've met a few writers throughout my life. I think all of which, at least at the time when they were doing it professionally, were quite broke. It's a very, very difficult living, and I think some folks are really passionate about it, but I think it's always been hard. One thing that I wonder if there's like a parallel here is, remember when like maybe it was initially when iTunes came out and like CDs started to die and it like disrupted how music was sold and musicians made money and all that kind of stuff. And the whole kind of like revenue model shifted. I wonder if there's kind of a correlation to what we're seeing now with the streaming platforms becoming like the primary way that people consume like video content. My assumption is probably yes.
Mhm.
And I think it's what's really interesting too is, I just don't know right now. I guess like it sounds like licensing, as you were saying, is like the primary way that Netflix is buying, because there's different ways that my understanding that they buy content. Like for instance, like movies can just outright sell to Netflix as well. And I was looking up data to see like,
Mhm.
the different kind of acquisition models, if you will, or agreements that they have in place. But from the sound of the articles that we've read, it does seem that licensing is probably the biggest one. And then that's where it's like the residuals or the essentially the profit share, if you will, seems to be quite favorable towards the streaming platforms, which certainly have control over that.
Mhm.
Obviously have the most power. So yeah, it's an interesting topic. I think like one of the things we wanted to talk about too is just, we have American Airlines that also recently approved a strike. They're trying to negotiate higher salaries, particularly for pilots, I think I saw. Now they didn't actually go on strike, but like I guess they approved it. And what's really interesting is that um the the rates at which people have been voting for these strikes, like within these unions, have been incredibly high. Now that
Yeah.
might be standard, right? Because like folks are in a union, like everybody wants to make more money, right? Like so maybe that's typical. But one of the things that we started to think about was just like, well, what is there a correlation between high inflation environments and strikes? And it does appear that, based on some of the research we do, there definitely have been some correlations. So I think like as spending power depreciates, I think it's probably why we're starting to see a few strikes kind of creep up, right? Is just based on folks' spending power is being lowered due to inflation.
Yeah, exactly. It's harder to get by in this economy for everyone, and that's why I think, just as you, that we are going to see more and more of these shifts and strikes in the streets and the market. But yeah, that also correlates with another topic that we wanted to chat about at some point, bonuses for companies. And recently, a CEO of a well-known and large company was going on record in a town hall telling people to not think about bonuses. So there's a lot of aspects, I think, that go into why workers would want to go on a strike right now. Inflation is high. Some of them are not receiving bonuses. A lot of them are laid off. The housing market, from what I've seen, is quite a mess as well. So there's a lot of these different components that kind of came together in this
Yeah, it's
wonderful year.
well, what's kind of tricky about the union stuff right now too is I have the exact like percentages in front of me, but the economy is cooling. Inflation has dropped. I think it's currently like 5%. So the Fed's done an incredible job bringing it down from like 9% to 5%, this is putting more pressure on households and everyone's kind of feeling it, right? But like that's sort of the point, right? Like it's working. I don't know. I mean, I like in terms of like the balance with strikes is we don't want companies, it's a balancing act, right? And I think that's like it's a negotiation because it has to be somewhere in the middle. Like you don't want to see industries lay off a bunch of folks.
Yep.
And everybody's in a tight position from like a borrowing standpoint. And everybody's feeling it. Companies are feeling it, right? Like
Yeah,
and
and workers, I'm sure, don't want to see that. Like they don't, because they are employed in those industries. So they definitely don't want anything to happen with those companies. They're just playing in this negotiation game
right,
because that's what it is at the end of the day. And that's how it should be. This push and pull back and forth until we get somewhere in the middle.
right. And I think honestly, like the writers probably have a better opportunity than others. Than like people working at airlines, right? As far as I understand, airlines it's like they're not profitable. They're subsidized by the government, right?
I don't
I
know, I gotta
believe,
do some more airline research. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
right,
I know they were previously. I don't know that they necessarily are now. I know that Southwest Airlines is in the process of authorizing a strike. They're going through a vote. But Delta actually had negotiated their contract in March, and they are giving their pilots a 34% increase, is what I found online.
Ooh, good for them.
So, I mean,
I
there's
live in Atlanta, so I'm very pro. I love Delta, I'll be honest, as a person who rides on airplanes.
as a person who rides that
I like them a lot.
human,
so Delta had actually authorized a strike last year, but they won a new contract this March.
Mhm.
So I think authorizing a strike is potentially a bargaining tool that they use with their organizations to help better negotiate, because that would
Right.
disrupt the entire industry.
Mhm.
right? So then we have the CEO of MillerKnoll, Andi Owen. She's recently taken some heat, and she's been in the news about comments she's made regarding bonuses, which I don't want to put too much emphasis on her. It's more so I think reflective of what we're currently seeing on the market and kind of the push and pull of what we're seeing between employers, employees, the pressure mounting from inflation. And I think Andrea, it seems like it's becoming your role to kind of give us the overview. Can you give us an overview of what was said in this conversation? And again, guys, like the point isn't really to like for people tuning in, we're not really beating up on Andi. It's more so just reflective of what we're seeing out there. And honestly, I feel like I have some interesting I have I feel they're interesting opinions. You guys might not. But anyways,
Like,
let's
you're
just
gonna love my opinions. They are
right.
awesome.
They're interesting. They'll make you think. They might make you upset. I don't know.
Good, let's go.
But yeah, what's going on with Andi? What happened?
And just as you said, we're just looking at the situation as a study case, right? Because we've seen employees and employers in the news and CEOs in the news in the past few months, actually. So that should not become a trend, I believe. Basically, it's the CEO of MillerKnoll. Her name is Andi Owen. She was in a town hall, an all hands meeting with, I'm not sure if all of her team or part of her team, but she was in a meeting. And people were asking questions in particular about bonuses. And she kind of went off on the bonuses side and told them that they shouldn't be asking about bonuses. Their focus right now should be on the revenue goal that they had set, to stop asking about bonuses. And then she even upped that ante and said that she wants to share some valuable advice that she received at some point in her career. And the advice was basically visit Piri City, but do not live in it. Do not live in it. So she said to her employees, leave Piri City, do not ask me about bonuses. The lambasting that came afterwards was due to the communication style and also what she said, because the meaning there was also not really appropriate. And that comes also in the context of her actually receiving her bonus for that year, and reports vary from 1 to 5 million. So we're not sure exactly how much it was, but there was a bonus. So yeah, that was kind of the situation there. She apologized afterwards, said that it was out of context. I'm not really sure how, I mean, everything's there, and that she apologizes and it wasn't the best way of phrasing. Yes. So that was the situation. Would you like to share your amazing insights here, James?
They're not amazing. I never said that.
We said that. We
my
said that.
opinions are interesting to me, just like to everyone else on the planet. Just like theirs are to everybody else on the planet. So I think like it's really difficult to kind of, and I'm not suggesting she was shooting from the hip, but it sounds like this was, a looser kind of conversational style that she had with her team. It sounds like the biggest issue that folks seem to have is that she paid herself. She didn't pay herself, but she was approved by the board or whoever else to take bonuses when employees were not taking bonuses. And that really seems to be like maybe from like more of like a PR or just a communication standpoint, a bit of a faux pas in how those things were communicated. One of the first things I looked at is like, she runs an 11,000 person company. And what's the average take home for CEOs that run those size of organizations? And is the bonus a line that she received alongside compensation of people in similar roles? Very few people are qualified to run organizations of that size. And so I think that is something that isn't being discussed because people like backing into their beliefs opposed to actually questioning their beliefs. It's like one of those things, if you want to prove yourself right, then prove yourself wrong. And I haven't seen any data reflecting what the average take home is of salaries in a similar range. I tried to look it up, but just like looking up salaries for like a tech engineer, you see like shit that's all over the place and not necessarily the most relevant. So I'm not convinced from what I am seeing here that we're getting the full story. I can see why this is like people are having an emotional reaction. And I think, again, from a communication standpoint, probably could have done something better here. But again, I would be looking at average compensation packages across at a minimum CEOs in a similar industry. And then I'd be looking at that and side by side alongside what she's earning. And if it's, aligned, then you have to compensate folks competitively in order to get the best talent. The market is setting the price. So
same with employees. You can look up
right. Same with employees. That's my point. That's my
Yeah.
point. I mean, she is an employee, right? And so I think that's where my head's at. I think that, yeah, like people are really sensitive to these things and the communication was wrong. And I'm not saying like I'm right about this. Like maybe she is taking bonuses that are like well above the median for CEOs in that bracket. And maybe this should have been a situation in which, she should have taken a more significant cut. I don't know. I mean, I'm just, again, like, I'm not sure, like, that's kind of like and this is me kind of playing devil's advocate and bringing a level of skepticism to what seems to be a popular opinion. I'm not suggesting that I'm right or this is necessarily my opinion. I'm just suggesting that there are holes in this argument. It's not built upon sound premises. There's gaps here that we should just be aware of in these types of situations.
Like, we don't have the statements in front of us, the bank statements or the numbers in front of us for the bonuses. Very, very true. But yeah, I think people were mostly upset of the double standard. Like, if we're gonna go through this and rough this out, let's all do it together, right? And she did mention, I remembered from her apology statement, she did mention that she intended for this mini speech to be something to fire up her team, and that she's sorry that it went
did fire them up
direction. Exactly. Not towards the goal, like. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and
yeah.
I think people are making the comparison not between her and other CEOs of like a similar size organization, but her and the CEOs we've heard about who did take pay cuts to avoid layoffs or to make it so they were going to be able to pay their employees bonuses or keep their salaries the same or whatever the case may be. Like we saw in the tech industry, like the CEO of Google, the CEO of Apple, like they all took salary cuts so that they could avoid layoffs as much as possible. Obviously, they still had to do layoffs, but I think that's the point of comparison that people are thinking of, not is she equitably paid compared to other CEOs of companies her size.
Right. I mean,
it's
and to me, that's all communication too. It's like, you know,
Mhm.
a CEO salary for large tech companies, a drop in the bucket. It's not going to impact their layoff plans. Like, it's just like this concept of we're all in it together. So like, yeah, I see it like from a communication standpoint, like that makes sense. But you know, like you're also like, we're not familiar even like when these big, you know, CEOs are taking cuts, like what's their stock packages look like?
True.
There's a
oh
lot of
yeah,
other,
no one's
you
saying
know,
they're poor now. Like no
Yeah.
one.
I mean,
We're only seeing a
we're thinking like
snapshot.
what, like, you know, so it's like these people are worth like hundreds of millions of dollars. So like they're
Mhm.
lowering their
Yeah, like
salaries by like a
when the
couple
Apple
million.
CEO Tim Cook took his pay cut, he took a 40% pay cut down to 49 million. Like, hear me say, like
Oh,
losing
let
40%.
Yeah.
me
Right.
type
So
away.
Yeah. And you
no
know,
one's like,
the board's like, hey, I'm sorry. It's just gonna be for a year or two. Like, we'll get you back up there. You know,
right. Like
yeah,
he's not struggling to
right.
continue his mortgage. Like, for example, like he's
Well,
okay.
I don't know. I mean, you know,
I know maybe he bought it.
Maybe he has too many mortgages.
Maybe
Yeah.
it's too many
Too many
mortgages.
yachts.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's like a whole fleet of boats that he purchased. Who knows?
yeah.
I mean, I think when you're in a room talking to an employee that's making $100,000 or $150,000 a year, and we've had 9% inflation, the fact that, you know, they're not going to get a bonus and they're wondering like, you know, tuition's going up at school, or my groceries just went up 25% this month. So it's a matter of how you're communicating the message to effectively let the team know, hey, we're all in this together. It's tough out there right now. We're all busting our butts, trying to sell, getting it done. And it's a sign of solidarity as opposed to, you know, let's not sit in pity city too long.
Right.
Mhm.
And so this is like, so I think that it's very clearly a big mistake in communication. And I think too, like from a leadership standpoint, it is not a move that I would have made, or it sounds like anybody on this call would have made. Like, I think that having that alignment and compensation where if it's like we're taking a hit, everybody's taking a hit. Um, you know, I agree with all of that. I think the one element that needs to be considered is doing a side-by-side comparison and compensation alongside people that are running similarly sized companies. I just don't know in her industry, but again, that's an important aspect that I don't think folks are considering. But yeah, from like a cultural or leadership perspective, like this definitely could have been done in a much more appealing way that would have appealed to like essentially incentivizing or motivating her team, right? And I just don't, you know, I totally I agree on that aspect.
But
I
speaking
totally
of her
do.
industry, so what's tough is MillerKnoll makes office furniture, which like that's a dying industry now that so many companies have moved to and stayed with work from home or hybrid or sharing spaces. So even I mean, like to kind of have some compassion for her. I mean, this cannot be a fun industry to work in right now. Like
For sure.
her running what has historically been a multi-billion-dollar company with, like you said, James, over 10,000 employees. She, I'm sure, is not sleeping at night. Like I'm sure she's very anxious about the future of her industry. So I do get it from that perspective where she's like, y'all, we just got to make our number. Like we are a dying industry. I hope she didn't say that, but I mean, her industry is rapidly shifting and shrinking.
Mhm.
Yeah. I would agree. And
Yeah.
that's what leads you to do something like this and to act in such a way that you probably know at a conscious level is not really okay. But yeah, you're right. She's probably feeling the heat to say the least. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Like you don't make a pity city comment if you're in a mentally healthy space.
Yeah,
Like I think
exactly.
you
In a good
are
space.
operating out of your own
I don't
strength.
know. I mean, I think too, it's like how you might regulate your own belief system is different than how you might communicate to like, you know, others, right? Like my internal communication to myself is not necessarily my communication or even standards or expectations that I have with other team members, right? Like I think it's like you have to know it's all very situational and you have to know like how to communicate and how to make sure that there's alignment between you and your team and these types of things. And so like she might be saying to herself, like when she's going through something like, you know, suck it up or like deal with it or
Right.
whatever. But like, you know, that's not, it's I can't think of a time and place where it would probably be an effective way to rally the troops, so to speak, and get the buy-in that you need. So yeah, that's gonna be a tough one for her to
come back
bounce
from.
back from. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
gonna be a
I
toughie.
mean, I believe in redemption. Anyone can change, anyone can do better. So I believe that she
Yeah,
can.
I mean, you know, she could come
wants
out
to.
and say like, hey, look, like, you know, I'll cut my bonuses, or like she could still, like, there's things that she could do
You can
to
turn it around
write.
for sure. And
Yeah,
it's a
for sure.
good study case for everyone else. Like just take the right conclusions out of it and that's it.
Yeah,
Well,
for
and she's
sure.
in a tough spot that her mistake is so public. Like
Yes.
we all make mistakes every day. We all speak wrongly all the time. But like CNN isn't reporting on the rude thing I said to my husband. Like, you know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
I know, but you can say the same about living in the 90s. I mean, it was
Right.
awesome. Nobody, right?
you're like, let's go back to the 90s, man. That was a good time.
Yeah, 90s were great.
We're all anonymous.
Not every mistake has the potential to be viral. Like,
Yeah,
Right.
to ruin your life. I know.
I think that's why like the youth don't care about like privacy, right? Because they just like
Youth.
have never
You
had
sound
it.
so old.
I like
am-
that expression. I use it to the youth. I like
Youth.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're born without privacy. You're right, James. Basically. So they're used to it.
Yeah, I think so let's talk. So this was, I think we can come to an agreement here. Not a good way to handle the situation, you know, mistake, but you know, pretty significant one that's going to be, you know, hard to get buy-in from folks with this approach. And as you said, there's a lot of other leaders that have taken a hit alongside their team, which seems very reasonable, particularly if you want to really be a leader in an organization. So I think we're all aligned on that. I think what's we're also seeing is, and maybe less so, but it's like this shift of momentum from employees to employers in terms of shift of momentum in terms of a company's focus being on employee experience to customer experience and sustainability. So I wanted to say that. So I'm just going to speak slowly to make sure I like present the like what I want to. So yeah, shift in momentum from employee experience to customer experience and sustainability. And looking back at in 2021, it was almost like companies were almost exclusively focused on employee experience for recruiting and retaining top talent in a market in which was very difficult to recruit and retain top talent because there was so much money being pumped into the system, particularly in tech, to a situation now where companies are in tough cash positions. They don't have access to the same capital through banking institutions like Silicon Valley Bank. And the focus has had to go into survival and into sustainability. And I think that was a tough transition for a lot of companies to make and for a lot of employees to make too, where they essentially had come into environments that could prioritize a lot of the requests and changes and accommodations to basically now the other end of the spectrum where it's like companies just can't, and the focus just can't be there right now. It has to be focused on getting through this. And you know, there's this concept of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and like thinking about you know, I was talking about this with another CEO who's a good friend of mine, who is very people first and culture first. She's incredibly bought into her team and the people that works with her, and she's you know, an incredible leader. And she's, you know, we talked about the idea of like, you know, look, we need a roof over our head and food. And when you're in winter, that's what the focus is. And when we make money and we're profitable, that's when we can have all the other stuff. But right now, we need to focus on the essentials and understand that the other things are a result of getting through this and getting back to a good place. And when we get back to a good place, that is when we can start to have these conversations again. So I think that that's just really interesting. And I'm curious to see if anybody here has just perspectives on the momentum shift that we've seen and, how companies and employees are navigating the shift that we're seeing in the market right now. We have seen.
Yeah, I mean, companies have had to go so not employee first that they're doing these mass layoffs. And to your point, it's a survival mechanism. And it's because there was such insane growth in 2021. Like, I think I saw a stat that the tech industry employment rate skyrocketed by like 40%. Like there was a creation of 40% more jobs in the tech industry coming out of COVID, just as tech, or I guess kind of in the middle of COVID, because tech just became so much more of a focus. So now I know you've used language like market correction, like it's almost more like that as opposed to a recession or something like that, but it's still an adjustment. And yeah, I think you're totally right that it's definitely felt across industries, not just tech. Like obviously MillerKnoll isn't in tech, but as we keep shifting with new technology, with AI, with different things changing in the economy, yeah, I think employees. It's funny because you have the dual ethos of like your employees are people. Like you obviously want to respect them as human beings and as people, but then also like you said, like in winter we almost have to become. Like everyone has to hunker down. So it's like just a very different ethos, a very different feeling. So I would agree with that kind of being a perspective shift.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with that too, because we have to live in reality, right? And the reality is that inflation is high, the economy has not been doing well in the last year and a half, 2 years. So that is the reality, and we need to adjust to that reality. How we adjust to that reality, now that's the second part of it. And some companies have been more successful than others, I think, in doing that. But yeah, I know these things were necessary for a lot of companies. Of course, constriction happened. You're not gaining as many clients as you used to. So you need to now refocus more on the client side as opposed to the employee side. That makes perfect sense. But again, that balance.
It's always a balance, and it's always situational.
Yeah.
And you always have to strive to create the best possible experience for the folks that you work with. Sometimes you're not able to do as much in every environment, but as a manager myself working with Bridget and Andrea, like I try to reach out constantly, like, what can I do for you? Is there anything that you need? Like, how can I, what resources do you need? Like, even if we don't have the budget today, like we can put it in the forecast, right? Like, just let me know exactly what you need. I'll do it. Like, you two are like my top priority when it comes, to the people aspect of our business. I need to make sure that you're in a good place, so the business is in a good place. It's like constantly communicating. So just to be clear, it's like, even if you have fewer resources, those conversations should still be happening with direct reports across the organization.
100%. I mean, we can all as a team be focused on delivery and client performance and client success, but we need to make sure that our people, our team is not carrying the burden or the weight of less resources and less fluff, because we're in winter and times are leaner. We need to make sure that we're having those conversations, we're engaging them, we're checking in on them, on their mental, physical, and emotional well-being, because it all matters, because that affects them and their household and how they can perform and deliver at work. So we want to do everything we can to eliminate blockers and barriers to success personally and professionally.
Yeah, and I think it's actually a false dichotomy between investing in employees and investing in clients. Like when I feel empowered by my company, when I feel like I have autonomy and flexibility and I'm trusted to do a good job, like when I have all those elements and I have like an emotionally safe space at work, that is when I'm my best self with my clients. Like when I'm representing a company that I believe in and that I love to work for, the client is going to get a better experience. So I'm
sure.
way to force them. Like I think
they're so tied to the hip. There's like a causation relationship, like, or an inextricable relationship, I should say, because it's like you do need one for the other, and particularly in our business, which is like a services business, but really, in any business, in customer success, sales journey, anything that's like customer journey, anything that touches that, particularly in this economy where a lot of companies are seeing growth through like upsells and partnerships. Like we just got off a call with a customer that looks like it's coming back with us, one of our historically bigger customers that we've had. and they're actually growing this year. And we talked to them about like, well, what are you doing? Where's this growth coming from? And partnership, cross-selling, upselling is really what's happening. And you can't produce those types of outcomes without protecting the customer journey at every step. And the way that you protect the customer journey at every step is you get the best people who build the best process, who then implement it into the best technology. And it's like that's the cycle, right? Like those are the building blocks to creating exceptional experiences.
Mm-hmm.
They all go hand in hand. So like, Julia, I think that's a really important point you brought up.
Yeah, like you never stop investing in employee satisfaction, even in leaner times. Even if, like Bridget's saying, that looks more like check-ins as opposed to like throwing money at your team, like with, huge bonuses or whatever the case may be. There are still ways to invest in your people and make sure that they know how valuable they are and that their success undergirds your company's success and your client's success.
Mm-hmm.
I love
100%.
that. Like there are still ways, even if you don't have a ton of money. Exactly. There are still ways. The workload, the flexibility, the autonomy, there's a ton of things. Yeah.
So I have a question, was on the agenda, but curious to get your opinions on pay cuts versus layoffs. So let's say that a budget needs to be declined by 25% in order to be sustainable to operate a business. And you can, like for simplicity's sake, let's just say 25% of the team let go, remaining employees remain at full salary, or there's a vote, everybody decides to take a 25% pay cut. Might be a very uncomfortable conversation for us to have, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on what to do in that situation. Nuance, caveats, situational. I get all that. Curious to get everybody's thoughts though. Who wants to start with that one?
I mean, I feel like I'll just go, obviously. Cool. So I've been in both environments, and I've been in environments where both things actually happened, where people took pay cuts and then there was still the need for layoffs. And then I've been in environments where there were only layoffs and no pay cuts. So all of them suck. Like, let's just call that out. Like, no one is like, oh, what a fun position I'm in where I have to make this decision. So let's just be clear. This is not, no one likes that.
This is it's just like, sometimes you only have shitty options.
It's choosing between two crappy options, or like I said, sometimes having to choose both crappy options. So, like, I'll be honest, like personally as an employee, who doesn't have to make that decision, but who's impacted by it, whatever it is, it's hard to say, because obviously if you're the person who gets laid off, you would pick the pay cut. You would be like, I'd rather you cut everyone's pay. But if you're the employee who stays and who doesn't get laid off and whose pay is not impacted, you're like, yeah, I'd rather layoffs than a pay cut. So it just depends on who you are in that scenario. So it's on, I know that's like a very wish-washy answer.
What about so that's from an employee perspective, which is really helpful. What are your thoughts from an employer perspective?
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I mean, I've as an employee, I've lived through both scenarios, but as a manager and someone that's trying to lead an organization, I think for me personally, if you're reducing everybody's pay and you don't have the capacity to keep everybody busy, then are they really thriving and driving success and hitting everything home? Is their productivity going to go down to the level in which they're being compensated? And so keeping them motivated and excited to show up every day for less work, is that really a good solution? I think no. I think layoffs are a better option. So that way we can maintain capacity for those team members that are working so that they can thrive, feel productive, and drive outcomes. So we're managing capacity and workload along with compensation and pay. And so I think layoffs are a better option for my scenario.
Andrea?
Yeah, I think I agree with Bridget largely. And it is true that it depends on the economy and in which economy we're in. In maybe a more normal economy, that person that was laid off can go and find a job at that full salary or even more maybe. At the same time, I'm a both sides kind of gal maybe. So maybe I would try and I would kind of put it to a vote with the team, like, hey team, would you like to try this out for maybe 2 months? Like we have a a huddle, we look at the numbers, and we see if we try this for a month or two and buy us some time, what do people say? Do they prefer this option? But then we do set a timeline on it, and we say, hey, if we can't make it in 2 months and really go back to that original salary, we will need to make those layoffs. So I know that's a wishy-washy answer as well, but it's really tough to answer.
Because it kills you to have to answer, right? Because either way, you're impacting people's livelihood. You're impacting,
Exactly.
like, either way, you're gonna take I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. It's going to negatively impact company ethos. Like, either people will be like, oh crap, we're doing layoffs. Like, oh my gosh. Or they'll be like, oh crap, we're all getting salary cuts. Like, both of them are going to make people feel unsettled. So
And then what happens if you do, as you pointed out previously, Julia, what happens if you do the salary cuts and then 2 months or 3 months later, you've got to do layoffs?
I know.
And then you're creating an undercurrent of an underlying fear within an organization. How do people maintain productivity and drive when they're waiting for that next shoe to fall?
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's like a lot of, this is a personal belief. I don't have any data necessarily for this, but I think it's like understanding, have an appropriate amount of anxiety as an organization, and how that kind of is consistent throughout the entire employee base. Like, when you're in a down market, like, I, again, believe that could change, and I don't have data, so I'm not saying this is a fact or the truth, but like, I think a anxiety level of around a 4 out of 10 is quite appropriate. I think it's like, if you're, at a 7 or an 8, that's that's not ideal. But also at the same time, if you're not, people aren't worried at all, like, we're not living in reality of where we are in a recession economy. And so I think, like, the idea here is, like, if you cut everyone's pay, everybody's anxiety level at the organization is just going to skyrocket. Because, like, if people are less able to, like, buy groceries, and they have to be worried about, like, hitting their rent, or maybe their partner was also laid off and now they're at a lower salary, and those types of conversations are happening and thought processes are happening. And so when people are operating at too high of a level of anxiety, then they're not going to be in a position to produce good outcomes personally or professionally in their life. And it's just going to further, probably, I think, potentially hurt the organization. And it's just going to lead to more pain and more anxiety. And it just turns into this cyclical mess. And so, again, from the anxiety perspective, I'm just saying, like, we have to be in tune to reality. Like, when people ask me how I'm doing running the company, I say I'm good. I have an appropriate level of concern for where we are, and we're working toward a solution. Like, that, I think that it's not about, like, we try to remove how we feel if something isn't going the way we want it. I think it's just being at a place where we're aware of it. It's okay. It should feel uncomfortable because we're in an uncomfortable fucking position, but it also shouldn't be paralyzing. And so I think it's like, I never really even like the approach of, like, asking the team. Like, I need to decide. I mean, I can ask the team, but I'm not going to let them make the decision. Like, as a leader, I need to decide what I think is going to be best for the team to drive us through. And that's where, like, personally, for my decision, it's like, again, I have several shitty options in front of me. Which one do I believe, based on some kind of hopefully sound reasoning, is going to be the best option to move the company forward? And that's where it comes to the decision of, like, I think it makes sense to move forward with layoffs opposed to pay cuts company wide. And the reality is that folks do find other jobs. Even though the economy has slowed, when someone's laid off, that they'll have the ability to go and find a job at hopefully full compensation, assuming that they weren't completely overpaid in 2021, which in some cases happened in tech. So they have to, which is hard because they might have increased their cost of living significantly with those increases. So hopefully that isn't the case for everybody. But again, it's several shitty options, and a high level of empathy for anybody who has to go through these situations, or in any point of impact. It just sucks. But I've always, and again, though, I think it's very situational, because there probably are some environments where they literally can't do layoffs because there's roles that have to be fulfilled in order to operate the business. And if those are kind of like the unit economics of the company, then that company would be forced to go through pay cuts. That said, if they were forced to go through pay cuts because the business operates in that model, there could be a reasonable assumption to think that other companies in that industry would have to go through a similar cost-cutting exercise and lower salaries as well. So anyways, it's just interesting from a strategic standpoint as well to think about, but yeah, no easy answers there.
Yeah, definitely not.
And I think you have the right perspective that like the best way to choose between two crappy options is what will hopefully eventually get me out of having to choose between two crappy options. So
Yeah.
100%.
I think, yeah. And I think what you said, Bridget, is definitely spot on. Like the end goal being decreasing anxiety for your current team and increasing the potential of eventually turning around where you are right now and getting to a healthier business place. So
Yeah. I think it's like, when things are going well, customers are getting delivered a great experience, we're profitable. It's like, it's healthy to be like, all right, I mean, maybe still be at like a 2 out of 10 anxiety, like keep delivering great results. Like, we got to keep going. Right. And then, it's normal for it to be a little higher, but as leaders, you got to make sure that doesn't spiral out of control. And so then you just have to decide like, okay, yeah, what shitty option can I make today so that 3 months from now, I don't have to make another shitty decision.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I like
Controlling what
how
you
you
can
said that.
control.
Yeah. Well, this is actually a challenge that I've been working through. So I'll be, vulnerable with you guys and share this with you. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. Is thinking through like our revenue strategy and thinking about our pricing in relation to our customers and thinking about like, when it comes to pricing in a recession market, which in the tech industry, as far as I'm concerned, like it feels very much so like a recession. I don't care what we call it. It's essentially a recession, right? So like my thought process has been like, okay, there's basically 2 options to move forward as we're signing new contracts. We can hold our pricing strong and maintain profitable customers, or we can slash pricing to an extent and have some break-even customers just to make sure that we're, able to sustain budget as is. And so like from an initial high level perspective, I have an initial thought on what seems intuitive, and then there's another layer that makes it more difficult. So just between that, it's like from your perspective, outside perspective, before we get to the layer deeper, it's like, do you try to push for profitable customers at a higher pricing, or do you try to drop pricing and go to break even in a recession market? Does anybody have any thoughts on those 2 strategies? And this all ties back into what we were saying, by the way.
Yeah. So like I mentioned before, I live in Delta land here in Atlanta, and I also live in Chick-fil-A land here in Atlanta. And I say that because Chick-fil-A has a very interesting business model. I know there's all these like political things, but just to talk about it from a strictly business perspective, they have a very strong stance on, they have never decreased their prices. They never give discounts. They never give like, oh, a milkshakes are like, how at Dunkin', they're like, oh, iced coffee is $2 from like this time to this time. Chick-fil-A never does that, but they give away stuff for free. So either they're like, hey, pay full price. This is what this is worth. Or here, as a generous gift to you, we will gift you this thing that is worth $7. We will give it to you free. So I say that to say their ethos behind that, and this is kind of where I'm going with this, is you price your stuff at you're like, this is what it's worth. Like, I'm not discounting it. This is what it is. Maybe in a situation that calls for it, whether it's a recession or, a client who's been loyal for years and maybe their industry is going through a recession. And so we want to give them a break. We say, hey, listen, this is what our product is worth. We'll give it to you for this reduced cost, but you're kind of maintaining the thought of, this is what our product is worth. This is what our service is worth. That's my thought.
So
Yeah.
my thought on it is that you do somewhere in between. We have an amazing and incredible team, and I don't want to just maintain or tread water in business. I want us to be able to provide quality outcomes for our clients, but also life for our team members. And so you pull a different lever if it has to do with contract length and providing discounts to go along with that, or a loyalty type of reward to go back at longstanding clients and things like that. I don't think we need to drop deep discounts.
I would agree with exactly that. Like not changing pricing, but offering certain things to clients, whether it be some promotions, a special demo. Sorry, my dog wants to talk. A demo, maybe month, or anything that you can do to bring that additional value while maintaining your pricing. With, I would say, the only caveat that I can think of now, at least, if the business or the market is telling you to go in that direction of lowering prices. Maybe it's a super constriction in the market. Maybe the demand isn't as high, but that is a much different situation, more on the theoretical realm, that I don't really see as a possibility now.
It's situational. And so with some industries, they might need to they might be more sensitive to like short-term supply and demand
Exactly.
issues.
Market forces act faster, basically.
Particularly if it's considered like more of a commodity, I think it might be the right word, like versus like a proprietary technology where it's like, are we going to see price cuts from LinkedIn recruiter solutions? Hell no.
No.
Like
Nope.
they don't care.
Ever. No.
Right.
Well, our cost of doing business hasn't reduced. If we're adjusting our pricing
Increasing.
model because we are outside of market, that's one thing, but we're not outside of market. We're an exceptional value and an exceptional cost per hire.
Right. And again, though, like just like zooming out like from our own situation, just like as a general strategy. And of course, like I think our situation is good to talk about because it is situational. I think so. The layer deeper just becomes like if you have a lot of customers that break even, it's like the whole concept of business is sustainable growth at scale. Like that's the equation that every company is trying to solve. And hopefully their leaders know that that's what they're trying to solve for, right? But like the goal isn't the number of employees. The goal isn't even revenue. It's like, do you have something that can produce sustainable profits in a scalable way? So, whatever your margin is, 1 out of 10 employees, or 1 out of, 1 out of 10, is it that way out of 100 out of 1,000, right? Like as you're scaling units up, can you maintain similar or better, or, even if it's a little worse, like decent margins within the business? And so then like the question becomes like for us, and I think this might be applicable for other companies as well. It's like, well, if we have a lot of break-even customers, we're basically spinning our wheels and we're taking focus away from the customers that are profitable. So it's like, do we really want to focus all these efforts on this employee that's on customer that's not making us money, when we have this other customer who's great over here that is making us money, and we need to build our cash reserves, and we would be in a shittier position if that customer churns? And are we increasing our odds of churn even by like a few percentage points by focusing on customers that aren't making us money? Then it gets more complicated still. This is the great part. This is so much fucking fun. I love this so much. Just kidding. It sucks. Is then thinking about like in relation to like layoffs. Okay, so if we go with the break-even customer, then maybe we can retain more of our staff so that when we're coming out of a recession, we're in a better position to grow from that point forward. Plus, again, of course, the human element of protecting culture and working together as a team. So that is a huge part of the strategy as well. So it's like balancing all of those things and then deciding, okay, should we go profitable and do we make deeper cuts? Do we go for break even and try to maintain staff for longer, but also maybe be a little bit more spread thin? Right. And so then you're like thinking like, well, maybe somewhere in the middle, like you might drop down pricing a little bit. You try not to have break even contracts, but you're willing to squeeze your margins. And so I think in most cases, you try to do that. And I think to Bridget's point too, it's like, to the extent you drop pricing, do it to increase contract length. So that's like one of the things that we've been doing too, is like using that lever, saying like, okay, here's our typical engagement length, right? But we'll give you X percentage discount if we can get X percentage runway. which I don't always do in a good market, because it's like pulling the money fast as you can, as soon as you can, let's go, right? But I think in like these types of markets, it's like, okay, how can we have more predictability? And where we are now, I think we're at like a point where it's like, okay, I feel like we have to some extent a little bit more stability. It's still like rocky, but like, let's try to just lower a bit, increase contract length, try to avoid break-even contracts. So, because we need to build our cash balance and we need profitable customers in order to do that. We can't get in a better position by just having break even.
Mhm.
So anyways, I've given a lot of thought to this. It's been difficult to try to find the right balance there. I think we're finally starting to find it. Curious if anybody has thoughts on this. I mean, again, it all ties into culture and people and having a healthy organization and making hard decisions today to get in a different position tomorrow. It all ties into how we recruit, communicate, our values. Everything is all correlated to this. So anyways, any other kind of thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, because I think a big value add of Secure Vision, like part of how we sell our solution as superior to some of our competitors, is we have the best recruiters in the business. And a big reason we have the best recruiters in the business is because we do compensate well. So I think that is because we keep these healthy margins. So I think it's just a trickle down effect where we can't use that anymore as an indication of the power of our recruiting team if we start having these super tight, super tiny margins. And if we have all these break-even clients, then I think it's just like a domino effect of the quality of our people, the quality of our clients, what we are able to go to market with as we're trying to acquire new clients. So I totally agree with that, James. And sucks that you have to make those hard decisions.
I mean, it's everybody's in a position where we're making hard decisions.
For
It's,
sure. I just
and
appreciate that leadership.
yeah, it's not even that. Like, I'm not like, the hard part is just reasoning through which argument or stance is like the soundest, right? Like, what is, like, this is a common theme of like the past few segments. It's like, to prove yourself right, prove yourself wrong, try to prove yourself wrong. And like going through those motions of like, what is going to give our team the best ability to move forward, aligning financial and human incentives, right?
Yep.
Well, the other thing that we hadn't talked about in this particular model is the fact that when you have a client that has low margin or almost no margin, and we finish their hiring and they churn because we've completed the task at hand, then we've got no runway or a very thin runway to layer in a new client because we have no margin. We're just breaking even. And so it's harder to overcome getting ahead.
Yeah. And I think too, it like probably depends on churn rates. It probably, like the more locked in, if you have multi-year contracts, these types of things, or, maybe you're more willing to have contracts that you think are more so break even, versus like if there's a lot of volatility where you need a little bit more, you're trying to always try to get more predictability. I mean, every business can try to get more predictability, but like, I think you know what I mean. And yeah, like what's your funding cash position, right? Like maybe break even's okay because you got, millions of the bank in funding, which I don't think is really the case. I think that's dwindled for most tech companies at this point in time. So I think it's like, to preserve customer experience, employee experience, you need a buffer of cash. You need to be able to build cash reserves. And so you have to be very thoughtful before driving down negotiations. And like, the reality is, like, again, I'll just be honest, like we've lost a couple of deals because our pricing is higher than our competitors in this market. And it hurts a lot because we're making these tough decisions with personnel over the past few months. And it's like trying to strike that balance. And like, there's times where you like doubt, you're like, fuck, should we have gone down further? And it's like, well, again, just trying to use sound reasoning. It's impossible with the data that we have access to, or really any company has access to, because everything is so fluid in the economy, to know exactly where you should fall. And so it's like trying to strike that right balance, right? And so yeah, it's an interesting, right? It's tough, but I think like pretty much every company in the tech industry is like trying to figure this shit out right now, like from a pricing strategy standpoint, and not just pricing, but like contract strategy standpoint is probably a better way of saying it.
Yeah, and I think you're right. super situational. I'll be quick, super situational. And you need to look at the unit economics, at the churn rate and all of these things, because again, you might actually be in a position where you need to go down with your pricing. And if you don't do that, that could jeopardize your business. So there's a ton of situations that one should consider here. Go ahead, Julia, sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think there's also so many different metrics of success. Like the fact that we've been running our NPS survey for 2 weeks and we have a 90%. Like I don't think that's the case for some of I know that's not the case, having worked for other companies in this space. That's not the case at the places that have super tight margins, who don't have as happy of employees, who don't have as happy of clients. Like they're like, yeah, you're getting the job done. And yeah, I saved some money, but I mean, I think the increase in value that we bring is worth making these harder decisions.
Right. And so then like but return on investment, return on capital is what becomes like really tricky there. So I agree with you. But I like a lot of what I do on the show as the host is provide alternative perspectives. So just
yeah,
clear,
no,
like
that's right. Let's go.
and we're talking about something hypersensitive related to layoffs or pay cuts or CO bonus, it's not that I again, I'm presenting holes in logic, trying to present other arguments, because I agree with what you're saying. The way that I could summarize probably what's happening in a lot of board meetings and like just leadership meetings is, you know, or at least in ours, right, is, hey guys, everything's going great, but, you know, besides the lack of oxygen in the room, everything's going really well. You know, it's like, and that's the thing with like NPS and like reviews and all this great strategic stuff that's happening and feedback and relationships and networks expanding and brand blowing up. Like in our case, we have all of those things, and hopefully some other organizations have them too. I know not all of them do, but then it's like, well, you're still in a market where there's less budget, where like capital is more expensive. And it's like, you know, all of those things are great for the long term, but we have to like bridge the gap. And so one of the very situational things that we're doing is like, we're looking at, okay, Q1, Q2 are typically stronger than Q3. Q3 is typically our, you know, seasonal, not a strong quarter. So then it's like, from a pricing and contract strategy standpoint, let's try to do things so that we can secure longer term contracts to get us through Q3, because we know from a sales perspective, it may not be as good as Q2. And so like, there's also strategies like that where I think companies need to be thinking about like knowing the seasonality of your business, if there is seasonality, whether it comes to churn or revenue, right? And then, or even like bandwidth, like maybe there's like a season where customers are particularly noisy and need more assistance, right? Like it could look like a lot of different things, and maybe getting a little bit more situational with contracts, and because of like how that's going to impact like your budgets and thus like your people operations too, right? Which is like the biggest expense that companies have, are their people.
Which makes sense in a services company, especially. Like that is what we're selling. Our people's ability to recruit better than our competitors.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Anybody else have thoughts on that? Are we good position?
We're good.
All right. Well, look, this has been a really intriguing conversation. I think particularly in segment 2, we covered a lot of sensitive issues that are directly impacting, I think, everyone tuning in. And so I'm really happy that we have the space to talk about these things, and quite honestly, talk through these things that I think a lot of people don't necessarily have the opportunity to, or may not have the peers that they can you know, open up to and get to a place where we can really evaluate several different perspectives and hopefully come to some understanding of like, if there's a middle ground, where is that, or to try to think through these things rationally, and using sound reasoning to make better informed decisions about how we're leading folks in our organizations and whatnot. So thank you all very much. I think this is probably one of the most informative episodes that we've had, and one of the most topical episodes that we've had. I had a lot of fun chatting with you all today. Really did.
Me too. Thanks, team.
All right. Good stuff. And so for everybody tuning in, thank you so much for joining us. We're releasing a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 5 a.m. EST. quick reminder, we are going to be having a brand change coming up in the short future. We'll post it everywhere. It'll be really loud, so you know exactly what's happening, but we're going to be transitioning from the name Talent Acquisition Trends and Strategy to the name The Hiring Success Show, to better reflect our mission of aligning founder CEOs, hiring managers, talent acquisition executives to producing the best possible hiring outcomes, hiring success. So we're still going to do a good balance between highly technical conversations, thought leadership conversations, topical panel conversations. So there's going to be still the wide range of types of content we're producing. But again, as everybody knows who's tuning in, whether talent acquisition or founder CEO, getting the best hiring outcomes requires more than just having great talent acquisition leadership in a talent acquisition organization. Like, talent acquisition leaders could have the best process and tech built out, but if there isn't the buy-in or know-how from the hiring managers or the buy-in from the leadership team to get the appropriate budgets or whatnot, then it just doesn't work. So the idea is that this is hiring top talent. It comes down to a company-wide culture and understanding on how to hire. And so we want our branding and everything we're putting out into the universe for you all is aligned with that. So anyways, that's going to be coming up in the short future. We have some other really exciting news coming up. Thank you so much for your support. If you're interested in being on the show or know a founder, CEO, chief people officer, VPs of talent acquisition that you think would be a great guest, please let us know. You can reach out at talenttrends.io. We have Morella's email on there that you can reach out to specifically about any guests. And then the other thing too is that also feel free to reach out to Morella about any topics that you would like us to cover on the show that we haven't yet. It could be high level thought leadership. It could be highly technical, implementing a certain type of tech stack or reporting, whatever you feel like you need to know in order to run your organization more effectively. We'd be happy to cover it. And if we already have covered it in length, then we'll direct you to the episodes where you can check it out. But anyways, thank you so much. I always have so much fun recording these sessions, and hopefully we're adding value to you and your organization. We will talk to you next time. Take care.